You're hurt. I'm not gonna hurt you.
Who are you?
Elias Thorne.
Ayana.
The cowboy saw the girl being dragged by her hair. He rode in and took her with a bullet and rope. Montana Territory, August 1877. The dust had not yet settled from the last thunderstorm when Archer Zane spotted the girl being dragged by her hair across the dry creek bed. He was riding east along the edge of Briar Ridge, the sun low and hot on his shoulders, when the glint of sunlight on metal caught his eye. A man had hold of a woman's hair in one fist and a revolver in the other, dragging her backward through the dirt like she was nothing more than a sack of feed. Her arms flailed, legs kicking up plumes of dust, but her screams were choked by the blood in her mouth. Her dress was torn at the shoulder, one boot missing. If you enjoy the story, hit that subscribe button right away. And if you don't, then just hit the like button anyway to keep more Wild West love stories coming. Elias Thorne, a name that drifted like smoke across the frontier, carried from one saloon to the next, whispered over whiskey-stained tables, and muttered in the half-light of poker games stretching from El Paso all the way up to the shadow of Yellowstone. His name was not one people called with warmth. It was a name heavy with blood, regret, and the echo of violence, and it clung to him, as inseparable as the dust on his boots or the worn leather of his saddle. He rode alone, always alone. Companionship was something he had forgotten how to hold on to, if ever he'd known. His past wrapped around him like a heavy cloak, its threads woven from the cries of men he had hunted and the silence of men he had failed to save. Each mile he traveled only added to the weight. Each sunrise only reminded him that he had survived again, when so many had not. The sun pressed down upon the Great Plains, a golden fire sprawling endlessly across the horizon. The prairie shimmered, its tall grass bending under the breath of the wind, but the warmth of it never reached the hollow within him. Inside, there was only cold, a cavern carved by memory and shame. His reputation as a bounty hunter had earned him coin, fear, and a strange kind of freedom, yet that freedom was chained to one bitter truth, one unhealed wound. Years ago, he had turned in a boy, just a boy, no older than 20. Elias had done it for money, his judgment clouded by the promise of a quick reward, and a need he could no longer remember. The boy had looked at him with eyes too calm for a man his age, and Elias had ignored the instinct clawing at him that something was wrong. Later, he learned. The boy was innocent, and by then, it was too late. That truth had set roots in Elias's chest, a thorn that dug deeper with every breath he drew. No whiskey had ever dulled it. No ride across the empty miles had shaken it loose. It was there still, and it would remain until his bones turned to dust. So he rode north, away from the towns that knew him, away from the trails his enemies might follow. North, to a small settlement with a name that sounded more like a cruel joke than a promise. Liberty. He wasn't going there to find work, nor to hunt. No. Elias Thorne was going to Liberty to find the end of the road, to lay his weary body down in a place where no one knew him, and maybe, just maybe, to let the earth bury his restless soul. The mare beneath him moved with patience, her hooves pressing rhythm into the rolling sea of grass. The creak of saddle leather and the mournful hum of the prairie wind were his only companions. He had long since stopped speaking to himself. Words had no power when spoken into such emptiness. Then something cut across the silence. A cry. It wasn't the cry of a hawk or the yipping of coyotes. It was human, sharp, panicked, rising like a blade through the still air. Elias stiffened, his hand instinctively falling to the worn grip of his Colt. The motion was so natural he barely thought of it, the reflex of a man who had lived too long on the edge of a knife. His mare shifted, ears twitching toward the sound. He waited, listening. The cry came again, tangled with laughter, not the warm laughter of friends, but the cruel bark of men feeding on fear. His jaw tightened. He knew that sound. He had heard it too many times, in too many places, from too many mouths. Elias nudged the mare forward, the leather reins whispering against his palm. He followed the sound down into a shallow ravine cut like a scar into the prairie. There, in the red dust and broken sage, He saw them. 4 men on horseback. Their faces were shadowed by wide hats, but Elias didn't need to see their eyes to know what lived there. He could feel it in the way they leaned forward, laughing, cruel and hungry. They had cornered someone. A figure darted between the brush, small, swift, desperate. She stumbled, caught herself, and pressed on. A woman, her dark hair streamed wild around her face, a banner of defiance even as she fled. The leather of her tunic caught the light, worn but strong, clinging to the shape of her body as she clutched something tight to her chest. Elias's gaze sharpened. It was a bundle of hide, wrapped hastily but guarded like it was life itself. The line of her jaw was set, her eyes fierce even in fear. She was no settler's wife, no drifter caught by chance. She was of the land itself, her blood tied to the Great Plains in a way Elias would never understand. He recognized her people by the patterns in her clothing, by the braided ties, by the way she carried herself even while running for her life. She was Blackfoot, a child of a nation that had roamed these wide, endless plains for centuries, long before men like him rode in with guns and law papers. And these men were hunting her like she was game. One of them spurred his horse forward, cutting her off with a cruel shout. Another threw a lasso, the rope snapping through the air, missing her by a breath. The men laughed again, the sound sharp as broken glass. Elias's breath caught, a low ache stirring in the hollow of his chest. He had no business here, he told himself that. He was no savior, no righteous hand of justice. He was a man dragging his sins north, looking for a grave. But something in him shifted, like the earth cracking after a long freeze. Because he had seen eyes like hers before, fierce, terrified, too young to hold so much pain. He had seen them in the boy he'd betrayed, in the faces of those who had begged for mercy when he brought them in cold. He could not unsee it now. The woman stumbled again, the bundle in her arms nearly slipping. She gasped, clutching it tighter. A cry broke from her lips, raw and desperate. It wasn't just for herself. Whatever she carried, she would die before letting them take it. Elias's hand tightened on the colt. His mare shifted beneath him, restless, sensing his choice before he admitted it to himself. The men laughed louder, circling closer, their shadows falling across her. The leader leaned low in the saddle, his teeth flashing white against the dusk of his beard. He called out something Elias couldn't hear, but he didn't need to. He knew the tone. He knew the promise in it. A promise of cruelty. A promise of ruin. Elias Thorne, weary, hollow, broken as he was moved. He spurred the mare forward, the sound of her hooves cracking against the dry earth like thunder. Dust rose in a golden cloud around him. The men turned, startled, curses ripping from their mouths as they reached for weapons. Elias's colt was already in his hand, the weight of it steady, almost comforting. For the first time in years, the hollowness inside him shifted, not filled, but stirred. He wasn't riding toward redemption. He wasn't riding toward salvation. He was riding toward something he didn't yet understand, something that terrified him more than death itself. The woman's eyes caught his as he charged. For a heartbeat, the world narrowed to that look, dark, fierce, and burning with both terror and hope. And in that single moment, Elias Thorne, bounty hunter, betrayer, haunted soul, understood that whatever grave he had been seeking in liberty, it would not claim him yet. One of the riders, a hulking brute with a scarred face, laughed. "Just give it to us, squaw. It ain't worth dying for." She didn't answer, just kept running, her steps sure and silent on the uneven ground. Elias watched from a distance, the old debate raging inside him. He was a ghost, a drifter. This wasn't his fight. He had promised himself he wouldn't get involved. But then he saw the flicker in her eyes as she dodged a grabbing hand, not fear, but a fierce, defiant pride. A fire. It was the same fire he'd seen in the eyes of the innocent boy he'd sent to the gallows, a spark that had been extinguished by his own selfish actions. The past clawed at him, a familiar, painful ghost. He couldn't stand by and watch that fire be put out again. His jaw tightened. He pulled his rifle from the saddle scabbard, the cold steel a comfort in his hand. He chambered around with a smooth, practiced motion, the sound a soft click in the vast silence. He didn't have time to be clever. He took aim, not at the men, but at the ground directly in front of their horses. The shot echoed like thunder, a crack that sliced through the laughter and shouts. The horses reared, panicked and whinnying, and the riders were thrown into chaos. It was the diversion she needed. The woman, quick as a hawk, scrambled up the rocky slope of the ravine, a blur of motion. Elias Thorne had been called many things in his life: ghost, gunman, bounty hunter, murderer. None of the names ever sat right with him, yet none were wrong either. He was a man shaped by violence, bound to it like a shadow he could not cut loose. When he rode down that ravine, the sun burning gold above the plains, he wasn't riding for honor. He wasn't riding for glory. He was riding because something inside him, something he thought long dead, refused to let him watch another innocent fall. The men, startled at first, turned toward him. 4 pairs of eyes glared through the dust. One of them, a thick-necked brute with a jagged scar crawling down his cheek, spat his rage into the wind. "Who the hell are you?" the scarred man bellowed, voice hoarse from whiskey and cruelty, his rifle already swinging up to fire. Elias didn't answer. He never wasted words when silence cut sharper. Instead, he leaned forward in the saddle, boots pressing against his mare's flanks, and she surged into a run. The world blurred into dust and thunder. He didn't want to fight. God knew he had fought enough battles to fill 3 lifetimes, but he was not afraid of it either. The years had stripped fear from him the way storms strip bark from old trees. What remained was a man of bone and steel, a storm wrapped in flesh. He rode down like a phantom, revolver already in hand, its steel catching the dying light like a cruel star. The riders faltered. They had chased a woman, small and alone, an easy kill. They hadn't counted on him. To them, he wasn't a man but a shadow risen from the graves of the West. A legend of violence that saloons whispered about when the lamps burned low. Their hesitation was brief, but it was enough. Elias's eyes, cold and merciless, told them what he was capable of. He saw her then, the woman. She had stumbled in the dust, her leg caught in the cruel snarl of a thorn bush, the branches digging into her skin like claws. Her face was contorted in pain, her breath ragged. Still, she clutched the bundle against her chest, her arms trembling but unyielding. He could see now it was wrapped in hide and beads, the kind of care given to something sacred. Blood streaked her shin where the thorns tore her, but she did not cry out. She bit her lip instead, eyes blazing with the fire of someone who refused to break. The scarred man urged his horse toward her, his face twisted with rage and hunger. Elias did not slow. His revolver rose, steady as stone, and in the silence between heartbeats he fired. The bullet cut through the air, a whisper of iron and death. It struck the scarred man's rifle, tearing it from his grip with a shriek of metal. The weapon spun away into the dust. The man's curse echoed across the ravine, but it was laced with shock. He had expected death, not disarmament. The others saw it too. They saw their leader's weapon gone, and in his place, a rider who had come out of nowhere, riding like a storm cloud with death in his eyes. And in that moment, their cruelty shrank back into fear. Without another word, they turned their horses. One spat in the dust, another cursed, but none of them stayed. They rode hard, fleeing in a swirl of dirt, their laughter gone, leaving only silence in their wake. Elias barely watched them go. His eyes were on her. He reined in his mare hard, sliding from the saddle. The sound of his boots hitting the earth was heavy, final, a thud that seemed to echo in the stillness left behind. The revolver stayed loose in his hand, though his gaze was softer now. She looked up at him, chest heaving, hair tangled and wild, cheeks streaked with dirt and fear. For a long moment, neither spoke. Only the wind moved, carrying the smell of crushed sage and blood. Elias knelt slowly, his joints stiff with age and years of riding. He reached out, careful, and pushed the branches aside from her leg. The thorns clung, tearing more skin before letting go. She winced, but she didn't cry. Her jaw stayed set, her eyes locked on his, with a suspicion born of too many betrayals. "You're hurt," Elias said finally, his voice low, rough as gravel. She said nothing. Her arms tightened around the bundle, holding it closer. He nodded, as if he expected no answer. "I won't take it from you." The words seemed to loosen something in her, though her gaze stayed sharp. Slowly, with a trembling breath, she shifted the bundle just enough for him to see. The hide fell open slightly, and Elias glimpsed what she held: an infant, no more than a few months old, swaddled in beads and cloth. The child's dark eyes blinked up at him, curious and unafraid, as if unaware of the danger that had just passed. Elias's chest tightened, a pain sharper than any bullet. He thought of the boy, innocent, betrayed, lost because of him. The memory rose like bile, choking him. His hands shook before he pulled them back, afraid his touch might stain the child. "They would have killed you both," he murmured, voice nearly breaking. Her lips pressed together. Finally she spoke, her words quiet, weighted with both pride and sorrow. "They already killed my husband. They burned my lodge. There is no one left but us." The ache in Elias deepened, a wound upon a wound. He wanted to say something, anything, but no words could reach across the gulf between her loss and his guilt. So he did the only thing he could: he offered his hand. She stared at it, at the rough skin, the scars. Slowly, she let him help her up. She leaned on him despite herself, her leg trembling, blood trailing down into the dust. The child whimpered softly, and she hushed it with a tenderness that hollowed Elias out. For a long while, they stood in silence. The prairie stretched endless around them, vast and indifferent, as though it had swallowed the cruelty of men, and would swallow them too. Finally, Elias said, "There's a settlement north. Liberty. I was riding there." His voice cracked on the name, as if it mocked him. "I'll see you safe." She studied him, her eyes filled with both distrust and something he couldn't name. Hope, perhaps, or the faintest flicker of belief that not all men were wolves. At last, she gave a small nod. Elias bent, cutting free her leg from the thorns entirely, then lifted her gently onto his mare. She didn't protest, though she kept the child close, her body curled protectively. He walked beside them, reins in one hand, revolver in the other, every step heavier than the last. For the first time in years, Elias Thorne felt the weight of another's life in his hands, not as a bounty, not as a target, but as something fragile, something worth carrying. And in that weary march toward liberty, he knew the truth. He wasn't just escorting her. She was carrying him, too, carrying the ghost of a man who had long forgotten what it meant to protect, to atone, to hope. The prairie wind rose, cold and mournful, and Elias lowered his head against it. He wondered if this was mercy or punishment, salvation or curse. He didn't know. All he knew was that for the first time in years, the emptiness inside him wasn't hollow, it was breaking. And breaking, even painfully, felt almost like being alive. He knelt beside her, his hand outstretched but not touching, his gaze steady and calm. "You're hurt," he said, his voice a low rumble. Her eyes, the color of wet earth and ancient shadows, met his. She flinched, pulling back slightly, the hide bundle clutched tight to her chest. There was no gratitude in her eyes, only a deep-seated weariness and suspicion. He understood. He had seen that look 100 times before. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said, and for the first time in a long time, he realized he truly meant it. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice quiet but strong, like the rustle of dry leaves in the wind. "Elias Thorne," he answered, his eyes on the bundle she held. "And you?" "Ayana," she replied, and her voice carried the weight of 1,000 untold stories. He didn't ask what was in the bundle. He didn't need to. He knew it was something important, something that gave her the strength to face men like those. He helped her to her feet, his touch gentle and respectful, and she didn't pull away. He mounted his horse and helped her up in front of him, the worn leather of her tunic cool against his chest. He turned his horse west, away from the road, away from everything, toward a secret place he called his own. A place where the land was still wild and the ghosts of the past could not reach. He was a man with no home, no kin, and no future. But for this one moment, with this woman in his arms, he felt a flicker of purpose, a reason to keep riding, a reason to keep breathing. If you like Wild West love stories or Wild West stories, drop a bunch of 1 second and your place in the comments for the Wild West Love channel. Tell me where you're listening from, so I don't feel so alone out here. The ride to his hidden cave was a silent one. Ayana sat stiffly in front of him, her body tense, a wild thing caught and unsure what to do. Elias could feel her wariness, a current of distrust running between them. He didn't push it, he just rode, his arm wrapped carefully around her waist to keep her steady, his eyes on the trail. He had seen too much to expect immediate trust. He knew that for someone like her, a lone woman from the Blackfoot people, trust was a fragile thing, easily broken. He had no right to ask for it. All he could offer was a safe place to rest, a moment of peace. His sanctuary was a small cave tucked into the jagged face of the Bear Paw Mountains. It wasn't much, just a hollow in the rock, but it was dry and hidden by thick clumps of juniper. He dismounted and helped her down, his hand gentle on her back. She winced as her feet touched the ground, and he saw the dark bruise blooming on her ankle. He led her inside and lit a small fire with tinder and flint. The warmth spread slowly, pushing back the cold shadows. She sat on a worn saddle blanket near the fire, her eyes sweeping the cave as if searching for a trap. He set a tin cup of water beside her, and a piece of dried venison. "You should eat," he said, his voice low. She didn't move, her gaze still fixed on him. "Why did you help me?" "I don't know," he said. The honest answer, surprising even himself. "Maybe I was tired of riding alone." She looked at him then. Truly looked at him. She saw the lines of a hard life etched around his eyes, the scar above his left brow, the quiet strength in his hands. He was a different kind of man than the ones who had hunted her. There was no cruelty in his gaze, only a deep, weary sorrow that she instinctively understood. She took a small sip of water and finally, reluctantly, reached for the venison. Days turned into a week, and Ayana slowly began to unfurl. She spoke little at first, just watched him with those dark, watchful eyes. She helped him with small tasks, gathering firewood, mending a torn canvas tarp, her movements quiet and efficient. He learned that she was skilled with a knife, and that she knew the mountains better than he did. She showed him how to find water where there was none, and how to track a deer by the bend of a blade of grass. She was a woman of the earth, connected to the land in a way he, a man of grit and steel, could never be. One evening, as the stars began to pinprick the vast black canvas of the sky, she sat beside him near the fire, the silence between them no longer strained. It was a comfortable quiet, filled with the crackle of the flames and the distant call of a coyote. She finally spoke, her voice soft. "The men who were chasing me, they work for a man named Thaddeus Loxley." Elias's jaw tightened. "I know the name. He's a snake. He wants this," she said, finally unwrapping the bundle she had guarded so fiercely. It wasn't gold or jewels, but a weathered piece of bison hide, covered in intricate painted symbols. "It is the record of my people's land. It proves that this valley, this land, belongs to us. He wants to destroy it, to take it all for himself." Her voice trembled with a quiet fury. "He drove my family from our land. My father died trying to protect it. I ran, but he followed. He wanted to claim what was left, the land, and me." Elias's hand clenched into a fist. He had seen men like Thad Loxley before, men who believed they could own the world and everything in it. He looked at Ayana, at her face illuminated by the firelight, and he saw not just a woman, but a whole people, a history, a land. He realized he was not just protecting a person, but something far greater. He looked at the hide, then at her. "You are not alone now, Ayana. I will not let him take you or your history." Her eyes, filled with unshed tears, met his, and for the first time, a flicker of something new appeared there. Not hope, but the beginning of it. "I have something for you," she said. She reached into her tunic and pulled out a small, intricately carved bone needle. "My mother made this. It is for a man with a steady hand and a true heart." She placed it in his palm, her fingers brushing his. It was a simple gesture, but it meant more than 1,000 words. It was her trust, given freely. And as Elias held the small, delicate thing in his calloused hand, he felt a strange, quiet warmth spread through his chest. It was the first time in years he had felt something other than cold and emptiness. He looked at her, at the firelight dancing in her eyes, and he knew he would protect her and her people's legacy with everything he had. It was a promise he knew he would keep, even if it cost him his life, for he had found a reason to fight. "Hey, friend, go grab a full glass of water. People often forget to drink enough, and that's actually a pretty serious issue for you." The peace of the mountains was a fragile thing, and it shattered with the sound of a distant gunshot. Elias and Ayana were sitting by the fire, mending a torn saddle blanket, when it came. His head snapped up, his senses on high alert. "They're here," he said, his voice flat. He had lived too long as a hunted man to mistake the sound. Thad and his men had finally found them. Ayana didn't flinch. She just stood and grabbed the rifle he kept propped by the cave entrance. "Then we'll be ready," she said, her voice steady and clear. The fear he had seen in her eyes before was gone, replaced by a fierce, protective resolve. She was no longer a victim. She was a warrior of her people. Elias grabbed his own rifle, checking the chamber with a quick flick of his wrist. "Stay inside. I'll handle them." "No," she said, her eyes meeting his. "This is my fight, too. This is my land." He hesitated for only a second. There was no arguing with the truth in her eyes. He nodded, a tight, grim line to his mouth. "Then we fight together." They moved as one, a silent, deadly pair, melting into the shadows of the juniper trees. Thad and his brother, Jed, had brought a small army of hired guns with them, a dozen men on horseback, fanning out across the slope. Thad's voice, a cruel sneer, carried on the wind. "Come on out, Thorn. We know you're in there with that dirty squaw. Hand her over and this won't have to get messy." Elias watched them from his vantage point. He knew he couldn't take them all head on. He would have to use the land, the very thing they were trying to steal, against them. He motioned to Ayana, pointing toward a narrow pass. She nodded, understanding his plan instinctively. They would split up, draw the enemy's fire, and pick them off, one by one. The first shot was his, a clean, silent hit that took out a man's rifle from 100 yards away. Chaos erupted. Thad's men scattered, looking for the source of the fire. Then, a sharp, clean crack from Ayana's rifle. She had hit another one, grazing his arm. The men realized they were facing more than one opponent, and they were up against skilled marksmen who knew the land. Thad, enraged, screamed, "Forget the woman. Get Thorn. The rest of you find that pass now." Elias knew this was his chance. He moved quickly, using the boulders for cover, his every step silent, a predator in his element. He had spent his life hunting men, but he had never hunted with such purpose, with so much at stake. This wasn't for money. This was for honor. This was for Ayana. He took out another man, then another. He heard Ayana's rifle crack again from the other side of the pass, and a strange sense of pride swelled in his chest. She was a natural, a woman born to this land, fierce and unyielding. But then he heard a shout and a cry of pain. It was Jed. He had found a hidden path and had come up behind Ayana. Elias, his blood running cold, ran toward the sound. He found them struggling, Jed holding her by the hair, the wicked gleam of a knife in his hand. Ayana was fighting fiercely, but Jed was bigger and stronger. Elias didn't hesitate. He raised his rifle and fired. The bullet struck Jed square in the shoulder, and he dropped Ayana, screaming in pain. She scrambled away, her hand moving to the small knife she kept hidden in her boot. But as Elias moved forward, Thad emerged from behind a boulder, his face twisted in a sneer of triumph. "I got you now, Thorn," he roared. He fired, and a blinding pain tore through Elias's leg. He stumbled, but didn't fall. He raised his own gun, his vision blurring, and fired. The shot went wide. Thad laughed, a cold, triumphant sound. "You're a legend, Thorn, but legends die." Thad raised his pistol, aiming for Elias's heart. But before he could pull the trigger, a blur of motion came from behind him. It was Ayana. She lunged, her small knife flashing, and she drove it into the soft flesh of his leg. Thad roared in pain, his shot going wild. She didn't stop there. She grabbed his arm, her strength surprising, and twisted his gun from his grip. He screamed, his face a mask of disbelief and rage. Elias, seeing his chance, pulled himself up, using his rifle as a crutch. He hobbled forward, grabbing the gun from the ground and pointing it at Thad's head. "The legend lives on, Thad. You lose." Thad's eyes went wide, not with fear, but with pure, unadulterated hatred. He looked at Ayanna, who stood poised and ready to strike again, and then back at Elias. He knew he was beaten. He was a coward at his core. "This isn't over, Thorn," he spat. And then he turned and ran, his limp body disappearing into the woods, his wounded brother left behind. Elias stumbled and fell to his knees, his hands clutching his bleeding leg. "He got away," he said, his voice a ragged whisper. Ayanna came to his side, her face pale but her hands steady. "He'll come back," she said, her voice laced with certainty. "But for now, we have time." She began to tear a piece of her leather tunic, her eyes focused, her resolve unyielding. "You're hurt," she said, her voice filled with a tenderness that made his heart ache. She was no longer just a woman. She was his partner, his protector, his future. And as she knelt beside him, her hands gentle as she began to bandage his wound, Elias knew that he would gladly bleed for her 1,000 times over. He had found a reason to fight, a reason to live, and a reason to be a man of honor, not just a ghost of the past. The sacrifice he made, the blood he spilled, was not for a bounty, but for something far more valuable: love and justice. If you're watching on television, don't hesitate, grab your phone and hit subscribe to my channel so you'll never miss out on our amazing characters. A week passed in a haze of pain and recovery. Ayanna was a miracle of healing. She used wild sage and poultices from roots she gathered in the woods, the knowledge of her people flowing through her hands. Elias, a man who had always prided himself on self-reliance, found himself humbled by her quiet strength and unwavering care. He watched her as she moved, her movements as fluid as the creek, her presence a balm to his wounded soul. He knew he was healing not just from his physical wounds, but from the deep, festering wounds of his past. One morning, as the sun streamed through the cave entrance, she came to him, her face serious. "You have to go to town," she said. "We can't hide here forever. And Thad, he won't rest until he has what he wants. We need to face him on our terms." Elias, still limping slightly, nodded. He knew she was right. He couldn't risk her life by staying in the mountains. "We?" he asked. "You're coming with me? This is my fight, Thorn, and you're not going to be alone." They rode to Liberty, a small, dusty town that seemed to have been forgotten by time. Ayanna, in her native dress, drew stairs, but she walked with her head held high, her back straight. She was no one's victim. They found Marshal Boone, a man Elias had crossed paths with once or twice, sitting in his office, his face a roadmap of a difficult life. He was a man who believed in the law, but the law in these parts was often twisted by men with money and power. "I know what you're here for," Boone said, his eyes on Ayanna. "Thad Loxley came by. Said you stole from him." Ayanna stepped forward, placing the bison hide on his desk. "This is not something you can steal. It belongs to my people. It proves that the land he claims is his was ours first. He wants to destroy this, Marshal, and he'll kill anyone who gets in his way." She unfolded the hide, revealing the ancient, painted maps. "He forged deeds, Marshal. He's been cheating people, driving them out. And he murdered my father." Her voice was quiet, but it was filled with a chilling certainty. Boone looked at the hide, then at the two of them. He was a man caught between a rock and a hard place. "Thad has the whole town under his thumb. Folks here are too scared to cross him." "Then we give them a reason," Elias said, his voice low and dangerous. "We give them justice. We give them hope." Boone hesitated. Then he looked at Ayanna's unwavering eyes, at the truth in them. He looked at Elias, the legendary bounty hunter, standing beside her, a man who had once run from the law but was now standing for it. He made his choice. "The law is the law," he said, standing up, "and justice will be served." The words spread through the town like wildfire. The bounty hunter and the Native American woman were challenging Thaddeus Locksley. People gathered in the street, watching from the shadows of the storefronts. Thad, hearing the news, came riding into town, his face a mask of furious disbelief. His brother Jed riding beside him, his arm in a sling. "Boone, what is the meaning of this?" Thad roared, his horse skidding to a halt. "The meaning is justice." "Locksley," Boone said, stepping out of his office, his hand resting on the butt of his pistol. "You're under arrest for forgery and murder." Thad laughed, a cold, humorless sound. "You're a fool, Boone. You think you can stand against me?" He drew his gun, his eyes fixed on Ayanna. "I'll take back what's mine, and you can't stop me." But before he could fire, Elias stepped forward. He drew his Colt, not to kill, but to disarm. The shot was a blur, a whisper, and the gun was knocked from Thad's hand, clattering to the dusty street. Thad's face, a second ago filled with a smirk, was now a mask of fear. He looked at Elias, at the man who had defeated him, and saw a legend staring back. Jed, seeing his brother disarmed, raised his own pistol. But Ayanna, quicker than a desert fox, threw a small, sharp stone, and it hit Jed in the head. He staggered, dropping his gun. The crowd, emboldened by the sight of Thad and his brother disarmed, began to move forward. They were no longer afraid. Boone, seeing his chance, moved in. "You're done, Thad," he said, his voice firm. He put the cuffs on him, the metal clinking a final note of defeat. A cheer erupted from the crowd. Justice had been served. The bounty hunter and the native woman had done what no one else had dared to do. Ayanna looked at Elias, her eyes filled with pride and a deep, abiding love. He had risked everything for her people, for a sense of honor he had once thought he had lost forever. He had found his redemption in her, in the quiet strength of a woman who had taught him what it meant to fight for a noble cause. They had won. They had brought justice to a lawless land. If you've made it this far, I know you're a true fan of WWL. From the bottom of my heart, I wish your day is filled with health and happiness, and may a little stroke of luck find you in the next 15 minutes. Don't forget to share it with me in the comments. The days that followed were filled with a quiet sense of victory. Thad and Jed were in the town jail, and Marshal Boone had sent for a circuit judge to ensure they would face the full weight of the law. The townspeople, freed from their fear, began to rebuild, to dream of a future where honor and justice were not just distant legends. Ayanna was celebrated, not as a victim, but as a hero, a woman who had stood for her people and won. She chose not to stay in Liberty, her connection to the land too strong to be contained by a town. The bison hide, the sacred record of her people's land, was safe, and that was all that mattered. One morning, as the sun began to paint the sky in hues of rose and gold, Elias and Ayanna stood at the edge of town. They had packed their supplies, their horses restless, ready for the journey. They were no longer the hunted, no longer a bounty hunter and a fugitive. They were two people, a man who had found his redemption and a woman who had found her voice, ready to face a world full of new possibilities. "Where are we going?" Elias asked, his hand reaching for hers. It was a question he had never asked anyone before. He had always just gone. "Back to the mountains," she said, her voice filled with a quiet certainty. "Back to my home, to the land of my people. It's time to go home, Elias. It's time to build." He looked at her, at the firelight in her eyes, at the determination in her posture. He had spent his entire life running, and now, for the first time, he felt a pull to a specific place, a sense of belonging. The cowboy love stories he'd heard always ended with a good woman and a piece of land, but his Wild West love was different. It was a journey into the wild, a union of two lost souls finding a future together. This wasn't a happily ever after. It was the start of an adventure, a new chapter in their Wild West love story. He mounted his horse, then helped her onto her mare. She was a natural rider, as comfortable on horseback as she was on foot. They turned their backs on the town, on the past, and rode toward the rising sun. The vast, empty landscape stretched out before them, a canvas waiting for their story to be written. The air was clean and crisp, and the wind,